Georgetown Community Library. Today we're hosting Grant Welker, who is co-author of We Are MarketBasket. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Grant, for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
And thank you. I was saying it just before, kind of informally, how I find that people love to kind of relive the story of MarketBasket from almost 2 years ago. Actually, it'll be in June. It'll be 2 years since that time when everyone found out Arthur T. was fired, and everyone was kind of up an upheaval and wondering what's going to happen to this company that people in the Merrimack Valley love so much. What's going to happen to the livelihood of upwards of 20,000 plus people and a few million customers? What are they all going to do? This is a story that, unlike a lot of things that you hear about or read about, people had their own small role in this whole thing. It's been a lot of long-time customers that have come to a lot of the talks that I've done. I imagine we have a lot of long-time MarketBasket shoppers here, right?
25 years worth.
Yeah, that's what we find is people feel such a strong connection with this company. It's kind of like this region owns MarketBasket and vice versa, where it's just something unlike anything we've seen otherwise, and that's why it's a story that has had such wide interest and such longevity too. I think back to my first time covering the story was actually going back to 2013. If you remember, then that was kind of when this wasn't a national story yet, but it was more of a local story at that point. That if people know, we were talking about before a little bit, the two sides of the family who were in court for a long time. People probably, even if they need a refresher, they remember that the two sides didn't really get along. They haven't gotten along for a long time, and they own roughly equal shares of the company. So what happened back in June of 2013 was that all of a sudden the Arthur T. DeMoss side of the family didn't have a majority control anymore. Now it was the Arthur T. side, Arthur T. DeMoss' cousin. And it's confusing, Arthur T. and Arthur S., but I think a lot of people probably are familiar with both of them, right? So I'm a reporter for the Lowell Sun, so this is a huge story for us, even at that early stage. I was covering the first company's, their first board of directors meeting after this change in majority control. And knowing a lot of the bad blood between the two sides of the family, very different ideas and goals for what they wanted the company to be, everyone, Arthur T. included, expected that he was going to be fired. So they held this board of directors meeting at the Wyndham Hotel in Andover, if you know, right before you go into New Hampshire, it's Route 93. So I remember driving in to cover that board meeting that morning, not really sure what to expect. But if you know, there's sort of that long road, the kind of driveway that goes back, maybe it's half a mile off River Road. And basically that whole long stretch was lined with MarketBasket supporters. A lot of employees, because this was over the summer, it was a lot of families, a lot of children. They had their own homemade t-shirts. It might say Save MarketBasket or Save Arthur T on it. They had a lot of their homemade signs. And it was this crazy atmosphere that, as someone who, as a reporter, you have to be a little bit objective. You have to be objective. You have to be a little bit removed, always objective. A little bit removed from the story, kind of to have that perspective. You can't get sort of too caught up in things. But I remember being sort of thinking to myself, wow, at seeing all these people, hundreds of them, showing up for this meeting, really to sort of hold vigil, a little bit as some of them put it, for their boss. They wanted to show their support for him. They said that Arthur T., was often there for them in their time of need, whether it was time off to to attend to a sick loved one or to help pay for college, something like that. So here Arthur T. was in his time of need, so they wanted to support him. So this meeting went on for about 12 hours in the middle of the summer. It was a hot day. The numbers dwindled a little bit as the day went on, but there were at least dozens that remained all day long. And at the very end of the day, it was something like 9 or 10 at night. Arthur T. came out of the meeting. People, I think, were a little bit unsure of what was happening or where to go from there. I remember following Arthur T. as he went out the front door, down the driveway, just off the hotel premises where everyone was allowed to gather. He sort of, maybe not celebrated, but kind of exhaled with everyone. He had made it at that point. And I remember he said, I love you and I'll never leave you, which sounds like something like a lover would say to another or something, but it was a boss to his employees. And again, as a reporter covering this, I kept thinking how crazy this was, really.
Was it open to the public, by the way?
The meeting wasn't open to the public, so we were all sort of just holding on and just sort of waiting to see. And obviously everyone, for as hours and hours went by, kept wondering what's going on in there. Yeah. And I remember I was away because reporters are competitive. You want to be the first to the story. And I was reading people's body language as they were kind of going from one meeting room to another. And I was thinking, this didn't look good. So I had my phone with me, I have Twitter, and I put in I typed up, MarketBasket Board of Directors has fired Arthur T. DeMollis. Oh, and I remember thinking, do not hit send. Hit send, or tweet, it says tweet. But I wanted to be ready because I could see it looked bad. So I ended up not sending that tweet, obviously. Not for another year. It was a year later when he was fired. So people were a little bit on edge even though Arthur T. survived that meeting. Within a few months, we saw that the other side of the family, again, talking about a very different idea of what they wanted this company to be. So they hired an executive search firm. They said it had nothing to do with Arthur T. They weren't looking to replace him, and everyone kind of said, yeah, right. They got rid of a few of the trustees for the company's profit-sharing plan. And if you have ever worked at MarketBasket, or if you know anyone that works there, the profit-sharing plan is the most closely guarded aspect of working there, or certainly one of them. And ominously, they gave themselves, the shareholders, a $300 million special dividend. So they said the company had excess cash lying around, so you don't really need that. We'll kind of take some of that for ourselves. The MarketBasket way of doing things, for one thing, they say that's not, the company would say under Arthur T, that's not our money. That's our employees' money, or it's our customers' money, and it really belongs to them.
When you said they distributed amongst the shareholders, or
amongst the shareholders, yeah.
Okay.
So it was the Arthur T and Arthur S sides of the family.
Not the employees themselves.
Not the employees, yeah, which is what had always happened otherwise, and actually has happened since. It'll be, I want to say, in the most recent year, they gave out close to $50 million in profit sharing. So if you're eligible, and most employees are eligible, it can end up being in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you will retire with your profit sharing, because it accrues year after year, and it's paid out upon your retirement. So we saw that MarketBasket was heading in this other direction. And a year after that first meeting, the board votes to fire Arthur T. Now it's for real. And this show of support that I thought was so impressive and unique and incredible a year before was nothing compared to what we saw now. So we saw employees from the lowest tenured ones, the cashiers and baggers, to people right at the top who had been working there for 30, 40 plus years, all say that they weren't going to work for MarketBasket unless Arthur T was back. And what it really impressed me was, here I thought people were crazy for thinking this, but they said that they felt like their job was so unique, and where they worked at MarketBasket was so unique, that they would not have wanted to work there otherwise. If MarketBasket were to become like any one of its competitors, any other type of retailer, they said it would not have been worth working there otherwise. So while it took some people a little bit of time to, I think, gather their bearings on what they wanted to do and come up with a plan. Within a matter of a day or two, we saw, I think it was 8 or 9 senior managers walk out just like that. And I remember doing the math, and they had something like 300 plus years of combined experience. And they took all that tenure with them right out the door, and they said, we're not working there anymore. And if you remember, I think it took maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before everyone else said, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to stop shipments at the warehouse, and everyone working in the main office is going to walk out. And again, I'm thinking, this is crazy. Since when does something like this work, where you can tell your bosses, we're not coming to work anymore until you replace yourself with the former guy, Arthur T, of course. But what changed everything, and this kind of comes back to you folks, was the customers. Because almost immediately and unanimously, the customers said, just like the employees, we're not going to shop there until Arthur T is back. And once they did that, and once 90% or more of the company's sales evaporated, that changed everything. Because you take that 90% plus and multiply it by 6 weeks, and how many billions of dollars they get a year in sales. And it ended up being something like $400 million in sales were gone.
What did his brother do? I mean, the guy who was fighting tooth and nail to keep his position, and he must have...
What do you mean, the brother?
The brother,
cousin.
they were brothers.
Cousin. Oh, okay.
Yeah, what
was Arthur T
what
doing?
were they thinking?
Oh,
No,
Arthur T or Arthur
The other
S?
one, the bad guy.
You gotta be clear.
That's what I call it.
So we didn't hear much at all from Arthur S and his side.
Yeah.
I always think it's funny, people might have seen it or heard about it. He did one kind of interview, you could generously call it an interview, with Byron Barnett, a reporter from Channel 7. That summer, Arthur S was on his way to a board meeting in Boston, and the reporter showed up at his offices and said something like, do you have anything you'd like to tell the public? Something along those lines. And Arthur S just said, basically, can you get out of my way? I'm on my way to a meeting. And that was about it. And I remember, I'm watching it and thinking how people are waiting to see, this guy has control of the company now. And he wouldn't even sort of humor people or just sort of play nice and say, we're hoping for the best. We know it's been a difficult period for people. He just said, can you get out of my way? I'm going to a meeting. And that led me, based on what I saw and heard from people and people's sort of impression, business experts, it felt like the Arthur S side and the directors that they appointed really just sort of wanted to force this whole thing through. As far as getting rid of Arthur T, they would change the way the business is run. They'd milk it for more profits because they were unhappy with Arthur T keeping profits not quite as high as they could be. Mm-hmm. That goes back to the profit sharing and bonuses. And remember that 4% discount they had for that whole year pretty much. Prices are already low. All we saw was that they, I think, wanted to force it through. They knew it would be difficult for a little bit, but ultimately they would either sell the company, and we heard rumors that the Hannaford parent company was among them. People were talking about maybe maybe Walmart. Or if not, they would just run it as they wanted to run it, which is, as they said, more like any other typical corporation would be run, which is you'd have higher margins. You wouldn't own a golf course, for one thing. Indian Ridge Golf Course in Andover is owned by MarketBasket, just because it had always been that way, and it worked for them. Those are among those things where they said, this isn't the way a corporation does things, and that's not the way they wanted to do it. But once customers got involved, in addition to obviously the employees, and even vendors was very critical. We saw a lot of long-time companies, vendors, who had close relationships with MarketBasket. A lot of small companies too. Pleasant Valley Farms in Methuen, I know, comes to mind. Moonlight Meadery in Londonderry. is run by a former MarketBasket employee, were among those who pulled out and said, we're not going to ship to stores anymore until Arthur T is back. And in fact, there was one vendor, I think it was a seafood vendor out of Boston, said he knew something was very wrong when payments from the company started, he was being way overpaid for shipments, like vastly, in multitudes overpaid, and was thinking, what is going on at MarketBasket that they have everything so out of order? And so you add all this up, and it really was, we're talking about the 2 million or so customers and 20,000 or so employees. It was like a whole region-wide effort, like a whole community effort to save this company. And they really saw it as saving the company, not really just Arthur T. I think Arthur T kind of became a shorthand for MarketBasket as they saw it and they loved it. MarketBasket could still exist on paper if it was under anyone else, but it wouldn't have been at all the same. And once everyone got involved, that's when we saw this become a national story. And obviously, as a reporter who was covering this so closely, I wanted to look at those national reports and sort of see other people's take on everything. And even people who had never heard of MarketBasket could, I think, relate to, here was this company that people felt so strongly about that they would kind of get involved in any way. We also saw an online fundraiser that was set up for the warehouse workers who first walked out. And these are people who would donate, just regular old citizens in the community, somewhere in the six figures. I think it was maybe $200,000 that they contributed to help these warehouse workers, those who first walked out and really put their necks out there, make their ends meet while this was all going on. So these national stories focused on, this was an example of the middle class standing up for itself, or it's kind of the 99% versus the 1% to kind of put an Occupy Wall Street type of spin on it, and things like that, where I think those are all true. This is kind of, whether it's a statement about democracy or capitalism or things like that, no one at MarketBasket that I ever heard talk about this saw it as making these grander statements. Like they wanted to try to bring down capitalism or anything like that. They just saw it as they loved their boss, they loved where they work, and they wanted to keep it that way. And this was also a unique story. That's another thing that people picked up on is you have a labor movement, essentially, but this isn't a typical labor movement would be for better wages, better hours, working conditions. This wasn't like that. This wasn't a strike, both because they're non-unionized, that made it unique, and most employees did not walk out. If you went into any of the stores during that time, and I made a point too because I was always curious what was happening, you would still see a lot of the employees there on their break, or maybe not on their break. They would be out by the front entrance, like by the sidewalk with signs, and people would go by blaring their horns. So it didn't fit into a lot of these categories we were used to seeing. In any of these labor movements, you would see, if it was related to the boss, the CEO, it would probably be to kick him or her out. It would not be to bring that person back. So this became a national story, and I saw that people, what could you take from this? That here's an example of a company that can do things so differently. People often wonder, how can they make ends meet and do so well when prices are so low and they're treating their employees that well and paying them so well? But they do it, and it does work for them. They don't focus on just the quarterly earnings reports or year-to-year profit margins. They feel like if they take care of their employees and they take care of their customers, that those things will sort of just take care of themselves. And a good boss is said to have an open door policy. Essentially, I thought about this a lot, where they say, my door's always open, come on by. But in MarketBasket's case, or with Arthur T's case, he'll kind of take that to the extreme, where he'll actually go visit you where you work. we hear he doesn't do it quite so often these days because he's kind of a celebrity now, right? Everyone kind of knows where he is, so he can't just kind of pop in or out of stores. But he would make a point of going into the 70-plus stores and just getting to know employees. This is someone who has more than 20,000 of them, and yet seemingly he would have known almost everyone's name, at least if you worked there for any length of time. One thing that struck me 2 summers ago covering this was that even people would work there for a few months or maybe a few years, just during high school or college or on break, had met Arthur T. And it wasn't just like a superficial, hey, how you doing, and kind of move on along. He might remember their names or remember where they're studying if they're in school, or if they have a son or a daughter, he might remember your son likes to play t-ball, or your daughter likes to dance, whatever it may be. And for longer term workers, and there are a lot of them, if you go into the stores, everyone has a name tag. It always seems to say, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. It's amazing to see how long some people have been working there. I talked at one point, one of my favorite stories for the Sun was the group of 8 senior managers who first, if you might remember, they got fired on a Sunday, and that kind of led everyone to really become more frustrated and kind of rally around this and become more determined. They had all got their start as teenagers, kind of bringing it full circle to those teenagers we're talking to now. They were 15, 16 years old. They didn't intend on MarketBasket becoming their career. Some of them went off to college and found that maybe college wasn't for them. But they remember that they had a place in MarketBasket where they knew where if they worked hard and did well, they could move right up the ranks. So here it was 30 years or so later, and you have these group of guys who had known nothing other than MarketBasket, essentially. One of their sayings I always liked was that, I don't have a PhD or an MBA, but we had an ATD, Arthur T. DeMollis, meaning their education was in the MarketBasket way. So even if a business expert may tell you it's not really ideal, you'd like to have some fresh perspective, some people from the outside coming in, but they don't really hire from within. They do like people who know how they do it at MarketBasket, and clearly it does work for them. And that reminds me too, I always enjoyed, when going back to the customers for a minute, how customers would pay more money. As you probably know, if you went to, we'll leave the names of the competitors out for now. People were always saying, I can't believe how much money they're paying. They would uproot their habits, because if you're like me, I just want to get in and out. So I know the whole route I need to take to get all my regular stuff, and I could basically do it with my eyes closed. So all of a sudden you go to another grocery store, you have no idea where everything is, and people would say you always would know, if you're a MarketBasket employee, you know who the other or a customer rather, you know who another MarketBasket customer is, because they're looking up at all the signs of the aisles trying to figure out where they're supposed to be. So you have a bunch of clueless MarketBasket shoppers in a Stop and Shop, not knowing where they're going.
The other thing they did was take, I remember, receipts from other stores, and you'd
I was going to say,
tape it all over the window.
To go even one step further, you'd have people who would
look what I have to pay over this, and then you as a customer can look at it. Well, I could have got it at MarketBasket for 50 cents less or $1 less. Or
yeah, so just to sort of take an extra oomph, to sort of stick it to the board of directors and the new CEOs. And people always got a kick out of the fact it took 2 CEOs to replace one Arthur T. But it did. So to stick it to them, they would take their receipt from Hannaford, Stop and Shop, Shaw's, wherever, and drive by their normal MarketBasket and stick the receipt right up on the front door, the front window there. And I always thought that was great, that here people were already going out of their way to help out by shopping elsewhere. But they would take that extra step and they'd go and and put their receipt up there, and they'd sometimes circle the total at the bottom or say MarketBasket or something like that.
Can I throw a curveball at you?
Sure.
I understand a little bit of reading that I had done where there was an $80,000 or $85,000 difference that was paid to one of the wives of one of the other directors. And this had been the issue that had kept them in courts for years and years, even prior to this thing occurring.
I'm not sure. It doesn't ring a bell, although I believe it.
Yeah.
There was,
It was
I did a lot of research for the book and going back through all those lawsuits over the years.
Yeah, there are a number of them that lasted for a number of
If
years
people,
prior.
if people don't remember, maybe it's worth a refresher in that, again, talking about how did it come to this point where you have one cousin leading this charge to overthrow the other cousin and put this whole region in turmoil. And if you remember, Deval Patrick, the governor obviously at the time, and Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire actually got involved. They brought the two sides together and sat down with them on a few occasions because they felt like it got to the point where they had to step in. I remember Deval Patrick was at first hesitant at the least to get involved. He said it was a private business dispute and it wasn't his role to get involved, and a lot of people did not like hearing that. And what Maggie Hassan said was that she compared this to if it was a natural disaster, where you have, I think it was maybe 12 or 15,000, I might have the wrong number, but certainly a lot of, thousands of New Hampshire residents who worked at MarketBasket who were out of work. So she said if this was any other circumstance where you had that many people out of work, and that many people who were disrupted in their grocery shopping, the government would step in. Of course not. So you have the two governors even get involved in trying to settle this. So how did it come to this whole thing? And so if you know Arthur T. and Arthur S., so their fathers both ran the company together for decades, starting in the 50s. So Arthur T. is in the third generation. It was his grandfather who started the first Demoulas market in Lowell 9 years ago, actually. So it was that grandfather's two sons, George Demoulas and Mike Demoulas, who ran the company together for years. They both had 50-50 splits with their families, ran together. It was in I believe it was 1972, but it was in the 70s, that George Demoulas, that's Arthur S.'s father, was on vacation in Greece and died of a heart attack. So Mike Demoulas, who was Arthur T.'s father, continued running the company for the subsequent decades. He took care of his late brother's family. And it wasn't until, I think it was 1991 or 2, that Arthur S.'s brother, Evan Demoulas, got a note from the IRS about taxes he owed on stock in the company that he had sold. And he did not remember selling any stock because all their finances were in, they kind of trusted their uncle, Mike Demoulas, to handle all of that. So Evan Demoulas and his brother Arthur S. Got together, went through all this paperwork, and over a length of time added it up, and they found that 50-50 split the two families once had was more like 80-20, and they were on the 20 side. So even though in those 20 years or so in between their father passing away and at that point, their uncle Mike had taken care of them, but he owed 80% of the company now. So they took him to court, and that's when things really got really ugly. You might remember reading about that at the time. It got heated enough that at one point Arthur T. actually punched Arthur S. in the middle of the courtroom after his father was on the witness stand. And it was something like 14 years in court it took until this whole thing got settled out. Numerous appeals. In the end, a judge ruled, and it held up, that Mike Demoulas had defrauded his late brother's heirs out of something like $800 million, I want to say, plus all the money that they would have earned in the meantime. I forget. It ended up being an incredible amount of money paid out. And to boot, the Arthur S. side got a slight majority control of the company. But
50.2 or something like
yeah,
that versus
it was like
48.
50.5 and 49.5. But how did Arthur T. and his side have control in all those years later? So Evan DeMoss, the one who got that letter from the IRS, passed away just a few years later. His widow, who now lives in London, inherited his 4% share. She supposedly did not like the way that Arthur S. had handled all those lawsuits. So she decided that she would vote with the Arthur T. side. So all of a sudden, despite all those years in court and that final settlement, you have Arthur T. and his side of the family walking away with majority control. And what happened 2 years ago was that widow decided she would change her mind. And she would vote with the Arthur S. side again. Supposedly, she would not return my emails or phone calls through her attorney. I was not surprised to have not had those emails not returned. The speculation, I guess, there is that she wanted to cash out after all these years. Maybe they kind of felt like they had enough, so she would give Arthur S. and his side majority, and they would either sell the company or milk it for more profit, whatever they wanted to do with it at that point. So yeah, all she had to do was change her mind back, and that set everything off again. It was this whole domino effect of a woman who had married into the family, but the man she married has been gone for more than 20 years, and she only owned such a small share of the company. But when you add in all those years in court and the feeling of having been defrauded after all those years, and all of a sudden this, it could have been, I guess, a private family squabble became very private, very public, and it ended up affecting the whole region. No matter who you were, even if you had never set foot in the MarketBasket before, if you were a Stop and Shop customer, now all of a sudden your Stop and Shop is packed because the MarketBasket right across the street is completely empty. So this was something that I found that people really cherish their own role in this whole thing. I did a story last summer when it was the year anniversary, and I remember I went into a few of the MarketBaskets in Lowell. I would talk to a few customers who would all say, I only did it for the employees. We love the employees, we love Arthur T. And the employees would say, we couldn't have done it without the customers, or we couldn't have done it without Arthur T. Or you talk to the vendors and they would say, oh, well, we love working for the MarketBasket family, and they always say the word family. Or they say we love the shoppers. So everyone else kind of deflected credit onto everyone else. And I thought that was such a sort of typical MarketBasket thing to hear and for people to say. And so my co-author and I, maybe I should back up and sort of explain it. We've been very happy to tell this story, and we've done dozens of talks at libraries and schools throughout the area. So going back to 2013, when this story first kind of started up, I got an email from Daniel Korshin. He's a business professor at Drexel University in Philadelphia, saying that he had read some of my stories and wanted to incorporate what was going on in one of his management courses. His specialty is responsible management. So it fits in perfectly, right? So we kind of kept in touch a little bit. I would give him a little bit of extra, maybe insight, not my insight, but sort of my take on what was going on. Details that wouldn't necessarily make it into a story, but would be pertinent for him. So we kept in touch. I would quote him once in a while because he was following along, and being his expertise, it was useful as a reporter. You want to be able to quote business experts who would kind of lend their thoughts to help round out a story. So a year later, once they started having those huge rallies, you probably saw at the Stadium Plaza store in Tewksbury, it's right on the Lowell line, right on 123, he saw a photographer that had a Lowell Sun press badge. He said, is Grant Welker here? And he said, yeah, of course. So the photographer connected the two of us, and we kind of thought, hey, this is really cool. You're here. He was he has in-laws in Nashua. His sister also lives in Andover. So he had that local connection. In fact, it was, I think, his in-laws who tipped him off to this MarketBasket story. Hey, Daniel, you got to pay attention to what's going on. So that's how he read my stories. So we kept in touch even more throughout that summer. At one point, he wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post. They had a management blog, and he kind of gave his expertise in what was going on. This is when it was becoming a national story. So our publisher, who is a branch of the American Management Association, came upon that blog post that he did and asked him if he would be willing to or interested in writing a book on MarketBasket. So he suggested to them that he and I might work on it together. He would give his business expertise and his contacts in the field, and I was following along with it, written dozens of stories about this, and I could do research into the company history. And so they were for it right from the start. So as I was saying earlier, we kind of cranked the book out. Basically, we had so much material to work with. We knew we had a great story, and we wanted the book to come out a year later when naturally people are thinking about the story and talking about it. And it's done very well. People have been interested all over. He's done talks even in Europe. He was at Oxford University last fall. I was not invited. They didn't want to report from the Lowell Sun, apparently. He was at a conference talking about corporate responsibility, and this was a perfect story, even for people who had undoubtedly never heard of MarketBasket. More locally, I've been doing a ton of libraries, especially the Lowell, Lawrence area, North Shore, even South Shore a little bit. UMass Lowell made this book required reading for all incoming freshman business students last fall. We talked at Boston College. I talked at Babson a few weeks back. And it's been great to see such a broad interest. I think, and I've said it at a few of the colleges, I think the impact the story will have isn't with other companies now necessarily, even though we've seen McDonald's and Walmart, among others, have said they're going to raise wages for their lowest earning workers. I think it's going to be, this a legacy, if there is one, is going to be with business students who can read about this and hear about this case of a company doing things so differently and what effect it had on people. Or in those teenagers working at MarketBasket that I talked to 2 years ago. Some of them will undoubtedly run their own business someday. And they'll remember what it was like to work at MarketBasket this summer and how much it meant to them to be at a place where they were valued, they were paid well, and they felt like they were part of more than a community, but really a family. So that's what insight I'm sort of able to give as a non-business expert, but someone who has been so close to this story and heard so much from people who were involved in it. So it's also been rewarding to see, we were talking earlier a little informally about the 2 documentaries that are out now, which has sort of brought interest again into MarketBasket. There is We the People, who is out, it's out in theaters. It's sold out at the Luna Theater in Lowell. I think they had 2 over the weekend and 1, I think it might have been last night, that sold out. It's a small theater, but it's been great to see. So I know they're adding shows. It's at a few other theaters. And in Boston last weekend, another documentary, Food Fight, was shown at the Boston International Film Festival. And that will be out in theaters here and there as well. I know Somerville Theater, I think Marblehead is another one, but they're out in the area, and it's been great to see such a long-lasting interest in this story. So happy to see people come and hear more about it and discuss it. I find there's always a good number of questions or people sort of wanting to relive their own experiences, so I'm happy to hear
I'm curious, as
questions?
part of the background on this, is the way that Mike DeMolis made his extra money, or grew it, was that MarketBasket's? Because it was, when the stores first opened, it was DeMolis.
Right, yeah, and then they
And
sold
then
it to
MarketBasket, was it the MarketBasket stores that became the ones that he was primarily, that's one question. Then
Sure.
it seems like there was a couple of major casualties. One was another Lowell resident, Richard Donahue, who I'm not sure if he was disbarred or came damn close to it. And then
He
another
was disbarred.
major attorney, Crossan?
Gary Crossan, yeah.
Crossan, who, they were two superstars.
Mhm.
What happened to them? Because they were
Sure,
obviously.
yeah, I'll try to work backwards. So yeah, Richard Donahue, he passed away last, I think, September. So he was an aide in the JFK White House.
Wow.
He ended up becoming a top executive at Nike. And he was one of the attorneys for Mike DeMolis, Arthur T's
Judge
father.
Lopez, I think, also.
Judge Lopez
Right.
was, yeah, she ended up being disciplined somehow. I don't remember exactly how, but she's not a judge anymore.
Right.
So you had, Richard Donahue and Gary Crossan were two of the, and then I believe there was a third. This is another sort of long tail that feeds into this whole thing. They were found to have set up a clerk for Judge Maria Lopez. They had a scheme that they were interviewing him for this fake job. They interviewed him in Nova Scotia and in New York because in those places it is legal to secretly record someone, like an audio recording. So they set up this phony interview, and they were asking him, "Oh, I understand you." If I remember, I'm paraphrasing, of course, I'm going off the top of my head. We hear you're in this Demolis case, and kind of asking. They were trying to get him to, I believe it was to admit that the judge was biased in this case, not because they were interested as job interviewers, of course. They wanted to get him secretly admitting on tape that there was something that they could get this judge off the case. So those two attorneys, and I believe there was a third, were all disbarred, at least for a few years, because of what they did. So you had someone who had been in the JFK White House and had worked for Nike. And even when he died I believe it was last September, that was part of the story after the JFK and the Nike thing, was that he had this role, and someone who had such a celebrated career, there was that sort of dark mark from this case. And you had asked about, I'm sorry, your first
What the mark,
question.
how Mike
the two.
DeMolis had figured out how he had expanded his percentage from 50 to 80.
Yeah, with the two different companies, I think their rationale, and I'm going to go a little bit off the top of my head here, was that they needed to switch from Demolis to MarketBasket because once they went into New Hampshire with the liquor laws, you could sell liquor in the stores. But they were limited in how many liquor licenses they could have. So you would have some that would be a Demolis and some that would be a MarketBasket. But I do believe that
They also
That
had
was-
Shamrock, didn't they?
I don't
Didn't
know.
they didn't own the Shamrock stores
I'm not sure. I know they,
in Massachusetts?
maybe it might have been in Massachusetts. Yeah, they had a drugstore chain as well, and I'm blanking on the name that they had for many years. But I think that was one way that he was able to get the shares in different places and sort of accumulate that over time, was by having the two different
rationale for doing it
companies.
that way ever explained?
The
Did he
rationale
figure
was
he brought
the
guy-
liquor license.
No, the rationale for why he ended up, how he justified owning 80% of the company as opposed to retaining
I'm not sure.
50-50.
Yeah, I'm not sure it would be much of a justification. I know they did say, and I think the other side of the family did acknowledge that he had treated them very well during those 20 years or so in between. But that was about the only rationale he could give, because the shares are in his name, 80% or so to 20%, and even after something like 4 appeals, if I remember right, each time they'd appeal, the court would uphold it that he had defrauded his late brother's family.
Just one last question.
Sure.
Is it reasonable to say that MarketBasket is partly a grocery store chain, but much more importantly, it's a regional investment in owning shopping malls? It's just strip malls because
Sure.
they're the big they create the traffic that brings the marshals and the Burlington Coat and all the others here. So they give value and make it possible so that even if MarketBasket went away, not been away, but it was somebody else owned it, as long as it stayed profitable, they still own all that property. They're making probably a huge amount of money on that property, even without what's going on in the business itself.
Yep, that's another thing that makes MarketBasket unique, and another thing that helps them do so well despite low prices and high wages, is they're a retailer that owns almost all their locations.
They're their own anchor.
Yeah, it's almost unheard of in retail because you wouldn't commit so much to a location if you didn't know whether it was going to work. You obviously see retail locations close all the time, and they always lease. But in MarketBasket's case, they own nearly all their locations, and going back to that excess cash that the Arthur S. side said the company had, it's because MarketBasket doesn't go into debt to grow. And that's another thing that almost any other company would do. But their way of doing things was they would spend money that they have. So they'd always have extra money on hand. And actually, that's another thing people have asked, how is MarketBasket doing now that they are in debt? Because the Arthur T. side, and Tim and his 3 sisters and others, they did have to go into debt. Big amount of debt.
The prices have gone up a little too.
And prices have gone up, yeah, we've heard that a little bit. It's hard to know how much of that could be attributed to the debt versus, grocery prices are pretty volatile anyway. But that's something that, right, that they do so much differently is they don't go into debt. They own their own locations. It's a very different way of doing things, and it obviously works for them.
They must have done a lot of research prior to setting up their own shopping centers, knowing what's going to be successful.
They did, yeah. We heard a little bit of that. They would go into so much more. They think about it like maybe a step deeper than anyone else would. You really look into a location where you're not going to say, all right, we're going to expand by 8 to 10 stores in the next 2 years. And then you go out and look at those locations. You would look at the location and think, does this work for us?
Yeah.
Of course, they look at what other supermarkets are in that area, what's the traffic like, other factors. But I know of very few, if any, I believe they never have had to close a location because of poor performance. Some locations they've closed because they'd open a bigger one right down the street.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they've ever had to close a location because of performance. And maybe that could be attributed to just going a step further and not wanting to grow just for the sake of growing, but doing so because that particular location makes sense.
I know you said being a reporter, it's important to be objective, but in this climate, in this region, I mean, that must have been very hard to do. I think, but, so I'm just curious if you were able to speak with any or many people who didn't like what was going on and what your thoughts or what their thoughts were about it.
Yeah, there were some employees I did talk to in the main office who did not walk out because they didn't want to risk it, or they didn't want to try to go a period of time without getting paid, and they felt like they were sort of ostracized for it. But there were very few. There may have been others that didn't want to, reach out, but some who did. And we did hear that there were some bad feelings, as you might expect. If most people do walk out and you don't, then they kind of come back to work weeks later. There's some maybe animosity or some tension there.
Yeah, not only employees, but customers
Some
and
customers,
vendors and surrounding tenants and things like that.
Yeah, sure. Well, for tenants, yeah, that kind of goes back to the whole plaza discussion. You have MarketBasket's gonna be the anchor. You almost always have a liquor store right next door. You're gonna have a bank, Dunkin' Donuts, a Pizza Hut, or Domino's or something like that, and they all rely on MarketBasket to a very large extent to drive traffic. And so that's another thing I would do pretty often that summer was drive around to different plazas and see how those restaurants and hair salons and other places were doing, and they were doing pretty poorly. Because you look at the MarketBasket parking lot and you'd have like 5 cars. And if people aren't going to MarketBasket, they're not stopping off at the bank or getting dinner on their way home. I don't know if I didn't talk directly to any customers who were unhappy with it. I'm sure there were some, of course. Some of the customers that I did talk to who continued shopping there did so like apologetically. They might be of limited means or have limited transportation options where they could get on a bus or walk to a MarketBasket, especially if you're in Lowell or Lawrence or Haverhill, a place like that. And they felt like they would have wanted to go elsewhere, but they couldn't. And even a few times I'd be talking to an employee or a manager and the customer would say, "I'm sorry." They'd apologize for shopping there. And the manager would say, "It's okay, it's all right." But those are a few cases. We didn't hear of many. As far as kind of a larger objectivity issue, it wasn't hard for me. But it makes me think of, in terms of telling the story from both sides, there was rarely 2 sides to tell. Because you have thousands of people in a parking lot rallying from MarketBasket. You have so many people who are willing to come to you as a reporter and tell you exactly why. Where you have the other side who didn't really say much, if anything at all. And if you remember, a few of the statements that the new CEOs or that side of the board of directors would make, they would either demand the employees get back to work. You can't blame them for that, of course. Any boss wants their employees to show up. But all it would do was sort of raise the tension even more. They would sort of say, "What do you mean go back to work? We made it clear we're not going back to work until Arthur T is back." And they would often, or on a few occasions, even blame Arthur T for this. And thinking about that as a reporter and sort of from a public relations standpoint, you know that the public is almost unanimously on Arthur T's side and on MarketBasket's side. And you are going to tell the public that it's his fault. And you think that that's going to work. As in writing about this, once in a while, depending on what the story would be like, I would include sort of some of what we did know from that side of the family. And it was in some of those limited statements or in court documents. That's how we know that they were unhappy with a lower profit margin, among other things. They felt like Arthur T wasn't, basically Arthur T thought he was the only boss versus a board of directors, which is his boss. But I kind of over-answered your question. But obviously I wish that the Arthur S side would have explained more. But I think they didn't want to or felt like they didn't need to explain it because it was their company, they owned it, and they were just going to push it through and run it as they saw fit.
What happened to the CEO that they brought in?
They have both found jobs elsewhere pretty recently. I should have done my homework and looked up because I don't remember off the top of my head. But they both did find work in executive positions elsewhere in retail, and I don't remember exactly what they're doing. It took a little bit of time, but they did find work. I remember looking up to see whether that company that hired them, whether the press release would mention their time at MarketBasket or not. I think one of them did, if I remember. I think it might have said, worked for Demula Supermarkets. And if you didn't know better, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's MarketBasket. But that was sort of interesting to see that they also got their shot.
You want to talk about your book?
Sure.
How long has it been on the market, by the way?
The book
Yeah.
has been on the market since August was the official release. So yeah, this is my shameless plug, essentially. Yeah, so we are MarketBasket. It's me, Grant Welker, and Dana Korshin, a professor at Drexel University. It is for sale here. Or
How is it done, incidentally, as far as the number of sales?
it's done
Any
well.
rough
Yeah. I don't know what the latest number is. It's done well. It's in at one point anyway. It was in Barnes and Noble stores across the country.
Oh, wow.
Which was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon and a lot of other websites. Local booksellers, I'm not sure exactly which one's closest to here, but there are some across the region that do stock it.
Is it in the business section in Barnes and Noble?
Yeah, yep, I've seen it in the business section.
How does this work in terms of getting a softback? You try this for so many years or so many
Right.
months? Or
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that eventually, yeah, you do the hardcover to sort of get a lot of those initial sales, and then sometimes they'll do a slightly shorter version, and you'd update it for a softcover, but I don't know. I haven't heard. They don't tell me everything.
What's it about?
What's this book about?
I mean, besides.
So this book is about, if you haven't been listening for the last hour, so this is really about, it's about the whole region kind of coming together to save this company, which can be an inspiring story for anyone, whether you've heard of MarketBasket or not. We worked hard to make sure that anyone could read this book, whether you're a longtime shopper, whether you work there, and where my co-author really helped was in making it something that could appeal to business people, academics, others in the industry who could take some lessons away from this without getting really too technical in it. So it's something that, and I think people can kind of relive it and kind of remember what it was like that summer, how nervous people felt for a while, and then at the end, that sort of joy you felt at a rare instance where just everyday people kind of came together in one. You don't really see it very often, where you felt like you defeated greed, you kind of defeated the bad guy. Really, everyone made out. I think it was a win across the board. Obviously, shoppers and employees got their MarketBasket back. Arthur T. and his family got to keep the company, get the company back. And if you're the Arthur S. side, you walked away with a lot of money, and you don't really have this headache anymore, right? We don't know what they think of it, but that's just my own observation, my own guess, is that everyone probably felt like they made out in this, and that's a great story to tell too.
Do you know, has Arthur T. read it?
I don't know for sure. I imagine he has. You probably know he's a very maybe recluse isn't the word, but he's very private, very to himself, very low key. So when it came to trying to interview him for the book, he declined. And obviously I have spoken to him a few times, but I would have loved to have interviewed him for the book. I'm told he didn't want to be seen as taking credit for this or having orchestrated it. Just sort of wants to move on and kind of let the credit fall on the people who got it at the time. I imagine he's read it.
He can probably give you chapter and verse and what
Yeah, anyone in that company could have written a book as well, and maybe they still will someday. I'm sure they had incredible stories to tell of what was really going through their mind at that time.
What's the price of the book?
$20.
Have you seen either of the documentaries that you mentioned?
I've seen We the People. I haven't had a chance to see Food Fight yet. I hear they're both very good, and I can tell you We the People is very good. It covers a lot of the same ground we did, where it's a lot of these last few years, but it also goes back to the beginning in Lowell almost a century ago, and the family squabbles and kind of what it meant for the area. And I've heard that Food Fight, because they were around more from the beginning, when this was before it became a national story, they had a lot more perspective on what was going on sort of on the street at the time. Whereas We the People was a little bit more maybe of an academic viewpoint sort of after the fact. But if you're interested, I obviously would recommend seeing them both, because even if there's some overlap there, it's still a story that you probably don't mind hearing again. You had a question?
Oh, just a comment. I've read the book,
Sure.
enjoyed it, and I would think Arthur T., if he read it, would find that you gave the credit to where it belongs. The employees, the people, everyone who pulled together. It wasn't, you didn't write as if he orchestrated it all, but you did give the background of how he set up the company and why the company is what it is, thanks to him.
Thank you. Would you have a question, Tim?
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering, do you have any insight into what he is doing to groom someone to take over?
I
In
don't
the
know.
future, the
They wouldn't
sequel?
tell me.
Are
I
there
imagine.
family members
So
that,
he,
you know?
Arthur T. has a son who is in his 20s, who does work at the company. Not in a higher up, a senior management role. And I don't know if he would be interested in, say, taking over someday. But I will say, I think if Arthur T. were to retire tomorrow, the company would do just fine. Because we saw that 2 summers ago, when you had all those senior managers who had been there for decades walk out. They're almost like Arthur T. clones, I think, where they buy into everything just as much as he does and he has. They may not be, they might have a slightly different style in management, but people, I think, tend to forget that Arthur T. has only been CEO since 2008. And it might feel like he's been there forever, and obviously his father ran the company for many years late into his life, and maybe that's why it feels that way, but sort of the MarketBasket way, their culture, far precedes Arthur T., and I think it'll far extend past his tenure for quite a while. As far as any succession plan, I'm sure they would have something sort of in mind, but I guess we'll have to wait to find out. All right, I'll have the last question.
Last question. You mentioned that Arthur T. didn't want it to come off as he had any plan in orchestrating this or whatever, and it was spontaneous or whatever. Did you get any insights in that perhaps maybe he did do a little orchestrating or helping promote this, or was it entirely spontaneous?
All I can go off is what they tell us is that he didn't, that they had no communication with him. So you could be skeptical of that a little bit, but I think that even if there was any communication or maybe orchestration there, I don't know if it really takes much away from what people sort of still came together to do, because it wasn't just sort of a top-down thing where the management said, all right, we're going on strike, everybody out. You still have to convince all the customers, and you have to convince people, even teenagers, to take time out of their summer to stand out in a parking lot waving a sign. So whether there was anything there between him and senior management, I'm not sure it would change a lot in what ultimately was accomplished, because it was from the very lowest levels to the highest and across customers, vendors, elected officials who got on board pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't think he orchestrated anything. I think it was the people.
I don't think you could orchestrate something like this. The culture provided the fertile ground.
Yeah.
And they may have provided a spark, and it then took off. But I don't think you could possibly orchestrate something like this if you wanted to. not the degree of participation.
And
You
he's
just
a
couldn't do that.
low-key person, and like you said, he knew, I can't say all the names of people, but he knew about his employees. He went around to different stores. I have never met him, but the only one story I can give you of how good they are to the employees, as you say, people start there as a teenager and work there for 40 years. I know a woman who started in high school. She's still there. She's now in her 50s. Her husband worked there. And then he got sick. And he was seriously sick. And he had to stop working. He was in the hospital in Boston. Arthur T. went in to see him. He died. Arthur went to calling hours. I don't remember if he was at the funeral. And it took maybe 4 months for all this to occur. They paid the husband. They gave the wife a leave and paid her.
Yeah, that's a great.
So, and I'm
Grant, you
sure
hear stories like that,
there's
absolutely.
thousands of stories,
Like that.
well, like that, or an illness, or a child, or whatever,
Mhm.
you know, and there is this loyalty to the company, to Arthur. And they didn't get unemployment when they did that, if you want to call it a strike.
Right.
That's what orchestrated it. That culture-
That's his way to orchestrate
That
it.
culture orchestrated.
It does,
that
it
occurred.
does, you're right.
Without it, no cigar.
Terrific
All
talk.
right, yeah, thank you.